research is so important to psychology because it helps psychologists continue to develop evidence-based theories of human behavior, and that also helps develop new strategies that improve the overarching human experience. Now, you may wonder why certain researchers choose to study certain behaviors, psychological phenomena, or events. And the thing is, every single study in psychology is always inspired by some kind of background existing research and some sort of real world event or phenomena. This inspiration is actually what makes psychologists think about their specific research questions, and then it helps them identify the methods they use to answer their research questions. In this lesson, you'll learn about how the background of a study influences the exact question that the study seeks to answer. I'll also explain how this influences the predicted answer a researcher expects to find. That predicted answer is called a hypothesis. Just like you've tested a hypothesis in science lab classes, in psychology, the hypothesis is also limited to experimental studies. You'll come across a hypothesis in studies that use experiments, seek to determine correlations, or a combination of both. Remember not to get confused though, because as you know by now, case studies, longitudinal studies, and self-reports and observations could also be combined with experiments. Hence, I'm using the term experimental studies. So as we dig deeper into this lesson, where you learn what a hypothesis is and the importance of a research study having a clear aim, it will help you to keep in mind some of the examples of research studies I've mentioned briefly in previous lessons. For reference in this lesson, I'm going to use Pilyavin et al. Study Subway Samaritans, which formally is called the Good Samaritanism Study, and a hypothetical example to clarify the definition of a hypothesis and the impact of background context on the aim of a study. First, let's talk about why the aim and hypothesis are so important. So you see, the aim of the study and then the hypothesis associated with the research question will both determine who the participants will be and what the procedures should be. So it also impacts the method used. So remember that experimental studies can use methods like self-reports alongside experiments. The first step before a psychologist can start designing their actual study is to see what is already known about the event or phenomena that they are interested in. They use this information to figure out the purpose of their own study, as well as what they expect to find when they are conducting their study. So the context behind a study, which is the existing research and theories that explain, predict behavior, is the background that psychologists use to figure out why they want to study whatever they want to study. So in other words, the background determines the researcher's reason for a study, and that reason is the aim of a research study. To give you a better idea of what this looks like in the real world, let's talk about the Subway Samaritans study, which happened in 1969. In 1964, a young woman named Kitty Genovese was brutally murdered in public, and nobody, not even one of the 30 neighbors who watched it happen, came out to help her. Now, the existing research at the time, which formed the background of Pilyavin's study, was that people's probability of helping someone is based on two things. Firstly, everybody believes somebody else will help, which is called diffusion of responsibility. Secondly, the likelihood of helping is based on how well they know or do not know the person who is in need and what their perception is or what their view is of that person. Now, Pilyavin, thinking through the traumatic death of Kitty Genovese, factors in this background. And he decided that the aim of his research would be to see if these two reasons I mentioned actually stand true, or is there any possible other reason. Pilyavin also recognized that those two reasons, diffusion of responsibility and perception, come from research done in laboratories. So he wanted to see if the same were true outside of a lab as well. This is why his experiment took place on a subway train. And if you have realized already, this is one of the ways the background and aim impact the procedures of the study, and in this case, the setting of the study.
Quick pause. If you're finding value in this explanation, there's so much more to discover at Alt Academy. where we break down every A-level concept with the same clarity. Now back to the video lesson.
To recap, the background is the context or what you already know as a psychologist, and the aim is the purpose or the why you want to study something further based on what you already know. So the aim comes from the background psychology being investigated. And as you can tell, the hypothesis is essentially what you think you're going to find. It is your prediction or your set of predictions, because remember, a researcher may test more than one hypothesis at a time when the predictions are related. Clarifying the aim and the resulting hypotheses is very important, because that helps you as a researcher understand how you're going to conduct your study in a particular way to ensure that you actually are accurately testing your hypothesis. You can figure out whether it's true or not true or needs to be rethought. The next thing you need to know is that Pilyavin had a couple of hypotheses. Very common, as I just mentioned, and actually you'll find this in many of the core studies. So Baron-Cohen, Perry, Hassett, in all of them. But coming back, remember that each hypothesis is related to the overall aim of the study, and it represents a unique prediction based on the aim. Pilyavin's first hypothesis was that the perception of the victim had an impact on the likelihood of helping. Perception means how bystanders, people around, see aspects like the victim's race and the extent to which they think the victim is responsible for the situation the victim is in, being drunk or being ill. The second hypothesis was that individuals would act in line with diffusion of responsibility, which I mentioned earlier, where you see somebody in need of help and you think somebody else will provide the help. Pilyavin et al. Discovered the second hypothesis for diffusion of responsibility was not true, because he found that as the group size became bigger, helping behaviors also increased. But he did observe that ill victims and white victims received more help than drunk or black victims, which proves that his first prediction about the impact of perception of the victim was true. So a hypothesis expresses the predicted relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable to see what you're testing for. In Pilyavin's first hypothesis, the independent variable was race and the condition of the supposed victim. The dependent variable was helping behavior. So one more thing for you to remember is an experiment can have more than one independent variable, and a good hypothesis will state both conditions of independent variables and clearly state what the dependent variable is, which will equal the expected effect. So a general formula you can follow for a hypothesis is that it will always state what the independent variable or IV is, and it will always include the dependent variable or the DV. And if there are two independent variables, it states the first condition of the independent variable, the second condition of the independent variable, and the dependent variable, of course. If you're feeling a little lost, don't worry. Let's look at a simple hypothesis as an example, which has an independent variable and a dependent variable. Hypothesis is, right-handed adults will be able to write more neatly in cursive than in print. Clearly, we know now the prediction is the independent variable, which is handedness, affects the dependent variable, which is the neatness of handwriting. The second hypothesis is right-handed people will be able to write more neatly in cursive than print than left-handed people. So again, now you've got two conditions or levels of the independent variable. Condition 1 for the IV, right-handedness. Independent variable condition 2, left-handedness. The dependent variable, how neatly they are writing in cursive or rather than in print. As you can tell, it's important to clearly define all the different variables in a hypothesis. This is called operationalization. Operationalization clearly defines what you want to study so that you can study it effectively. So going back to our handedness hypothesis, let's say that right-handed adults refers to people who work and write predominantly all the time with their right hand, and this includes men and women, maybe between the age of 25 and 45 years. Next, you want to say what neat handwriting is. So let's operationalize neat, meaning that The letters are of the same height, there's equal space between words and sentences. This helps clarify for you as the researcher how you can be sure that you're measuring what you set out to look for. And to this end, please do remember, when you're reading a research study, focus on how the researcher has defined the variables, the independent ones and the dependent ones. This will help you really evaluate how effectively the study has been done. So when you combine the background and the resulting hypothesis, you realize the test of the hypothesis is what contributes to the development of a theory. And it's also easy sometimes to forget that any research study is a part of a much larger body of theoretical work. And focusing on the background of the study in relation to the hypothesis is what will help you remember this. And then you can also think about which core approach a study is based within. That gives you further context and helps direct you to experimental procedures that are used to test the hypothesis. For example, we know Subway Samaritans is based in the social approach of psychology, and there you have the influence of social context and social behaviors. And so it reasonably makes sense that to study these phenomena, the researcher has actually opted to conduct it in a naturalistic setting, which is more true to everyday life. So in this lesson, you've learned about what an aim is, what a hypothesis is, how they tie in with the study's background, past related research. An aim is the reason why you conduct a study, and it's derived from existing similar research, which is the background. And the hypothesis is a prediction related to the aim that researchers want to prove or disprove. And the study's background also guides researchers in the methodology to use, the type of research to carry out, and the kind of sample to recruit. Speaking of sampling, in the next lesson, we're going to dive into the details of sampling in research.
Hey there! If you found this A-Level Psychology lesson helpful, why don't you head on over to altacademy.org, where you can sign up for the full A-Level Psychology course. In addition to psychology, we offered 7 other A-Level subjects. Thousands of students have already taken the leap. What are you waiting for? I want to see you there.